I think we'll get started because there's a lot to cover today. So I'm going to kick it off. Good evening, I'm Kathy Kennedy, and I'm the Peconic Land Trust Senior Outreach Manager. I welcome you to our ongoing series of Zoom programs. I hope, of course, that you're well and staying healthy, and I want to thank you for taking some time to join with us tonight. On a housekeeping note, you are muted during this conversation, but at the end, we'll be going to questions, which you can enter your questions into the Q&A, which is the button at the bottom of the screen. We'll try to get to as many of those questions at the end of the program and hopefully get you the answers that you're looking for. It's been interesting to recreate the programming that we've offered through the Peconic Land Trust as virtual programs, and I do hope that you've been enjoying them. Topics covered so far have included the importance of native plants in the landscape, creating and sustaining a living shoreline, conversations featuring local farmers, winemakers, and chefs, as well as local artists' connection to conservation, and even an examination of food insecurity on Long Island and the efforts that the Land Trust has been taking to try to address that. Tonight, the Trust is excited to partner with Seatuck Environmental Association to share ongoing science research that examines the changing face of wildlife on Long Island. Seatuck is dedicated to conserving Long Island wildlife and the environment and pursues its mission by advocating for wildlife and advancing conservation projects, engaging community scientists in wildlife research, and offering high quality environmental education opportunities for Long Islanders of all ages. Our four panelists, as well as our moderator, all share a passion for the natural environment and will tell you more about the movement of various animal species on Long Island. I think you'll find tonight's conversation both informative and thought-provoking as these scientists share some surprising facts. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, special thanks to our panelists and moderator. A little bit about the Peconic Land Trust before we get started. The Trust was founded in 1983 with a mission to conserve Long Island's working farms and natural lands and heritage. And with your help, as well as the help of thousands of individuals, partner organizations, governments, community groups, we've protected over 13,000 acres of land, including thousands of acres of wetlands, shorelines, meadows, and woodlands that provide places to explore nature, offer habitat for wildlife, and protect our water for drinking, fishing, aquaculture, and recreation. In addition, with your support, we've helped conserve over 6,000 acres of farmland that is available to farmers growing food and many other agricultural products. Working farms are an important piece of our mission, and protecting the land and then helping farmers be as productive and successful as possible is a high priority for us. All of this we do because of supporters like you. Thank you. So for today's panel, we're pleased to have Kelly Hamilton, wildlife biologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Emily Hall, conservation policy advocate at Seatuck, Mike Bottini, wildlife biologist with Seatuck, and Enrico Nordone, executive director at Seatuck. Our moderator for tonight's program is Arielle Santos, wildlife conservation policy program coordinator at Seatuck. Arielle holds a Bachelor of Science degree in marine biology from the University of Rhode Island, and her work at Seatuck Environmental Association ranges from community science project management, which you'll hear all about tonight, GIS mapping, half shells for habitats volunteer coordinator, and a lot more. So before I turn the program over to Arielle and our panelists, a final reminder on the Q&A. Please use the button at the bottom of the screen and pose your questions to the panelists, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the program. And with that, I turn it over to Arielle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that wonderful introduction. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Arielle Santos, and I will be your moderator for tonight. And thank you so much for joining us for the rewilding of Long Island. We are joined by some really fantastic panelists who will share how some Long Island wildlife is making a comeback. We will hear about river herring, river otters, eagles, and even coyotes. After the presentations, we will open up the virtual room for a panel discussion and invite any questions from the audience. So let's get started. Our first panelist is Kelly Hamilton of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and she will talk to us about the bald eagles of Long Island. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and then Kelly, you can take it away. How does that look?
Perfect. I
Awesome.
think I just have to move some floating heads over here because they're kind of in my way. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Hamilton, and I'm a wildlife biologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I just want to take a second to thank Kathy and those from Seatuck for inviting me tonight. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be a part of this. For those of you who, can you advance screens? Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief history about the bald eagle. For those of you who have been seeing them around a lot lately and aren't really sure why, I figured I would just kind of go through a brief description of how we got here on Long Island and in New York State for that matter. In the late 60s, bald eagles were actually nearly extirpated from the state, and that was due to reproductive impairment from pesticides like DDT and heavy metals. And actually in 1976, New York State was down to only one non-breeding pair of bald eagles. And so it was at that time that New York State kind of decided, you know, we should probably start to consider maybe doing something to help restore, you know, the population. So we came up with a restoration plan that involved what is called hacking. Hacking is basically hand rearing eagles to their independence and then releasing them, you know, into the wild. So we had a goal of, you know, 10 nesting territories that we wanted to establish in New York State. And that goal was met in 1989. And, you know, it was so successful that by 1999, the bald eagle, which was previously endangered in New York State, was downlisted to threatened. And by 2007, it had, you know, worked so well that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted them as a federally protected species, in the sense that they were no longer endangered or threatened. Bald eagles continue to be protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. And then by 2021, which was, you know, just, you know, this year now, we currently have over 600 documented nesting territories in New York State. So eagles have really come a long way. And when you think about it, not really that long of a period of time. So this graph just kind of shows how things have changed on Long Island in the past 10 years. Back in 2011, we had only our first nesting pair that was documented on Long Island, very far out on the East End. And since 2011, you can see, you know, we've had some gradual increases between 2011 to around 2017, and then things started to pick up. And, you know, here we are, it's 2021, and, you know, we're up to approximately 21 documented nesting pairs on Long Island. So as a state agency, and because this species is protected by not only New York State, but the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, we do not provide specific information as to where these nests are located. But this map just kind of gives you a general overall sense of how well bald eagles are actually distributed on Long Island. We, like I said, statewide, we have over 600 nesting territories that are documented, and we have 21 confirmed nesting locations for this year on Long Island. And, you know, last year we fledged at least 14 eaglets that the department is aware of. And can you advance? So, you know, where else might you see them? So obviously, you know, bald eagles like to nest in tall pine trees. They like to be close to water, but every once in a while, much like other species, they're going to find a location that they find to be comfortable that may not be so suitable and, you know, could potentially cause some interactions with the general public and other species. Last year, Long Island actually had the first documented pair in New York State to nest on top of a cell tower. It wasn't a very smart decision. They weren't very successful last year, and they proved to not be successful this year. So hopefully they learn at some point. But you know, they're looking for locations, and cell towers are attractive, much like they are to ospreys. That being said, you know, bald eagles are also experiencing an increased interaction with ospreys. We have so many pairs of ospreys on Long Island, and you know, they're competing for similar territory. So we're definitely getting a lot of phone calls about that as well in advance. So what are some ways that you can help us? Well, if you recall, I mentioned that we have 21 nesting pairs that we are aware of. And when I say that we are aware of, you know, DEC does not actively go out and search for nesting pairs. But we do take information from the general public or from reliable sources that, you know, claim that they are aware of a nesting territory, and we do then investigate it. So it's super important that if you see bald eagles and you suspect they might be nesting close by, that you can provide us with the most accurate information that you have. I mean, I love getting phone calls saying, hey, I saw a bald eagle flying over my backyard. Unfortunately, that's not super useful information to me. It's great to know, but I can't really do anything with it. In order to provide the best level of protection that we can for bald eagles on Long Island, we need to know exact nest locations. And, you know, just to be clear, we do not release that information to the general public at any time because they are a threatened species and because they're protected. So, you know, that information is confidential, and we do not give that out to anybody, you know, that requests it. It just doesn't work that way. So, you know, things that we need to know is if you find a nest, you know, GPS coordinates is super helpful to us, or a nearby address. And that allows us to go out and document it with DEC staff. And then we report that to our Natural Heritage Program, and that allows us to provide as much protection as possible for bald eagles on Long Island. So I know that was brief, but we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and I'm here for the long haul. So hold your questions till the end, and I'll pass it back over to Arielle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. Next up, we have the Seatuck team, which includes Enrico Nordone, Mike Bottini, Emily Hall, and myself. So as Kathy mentioned earlier, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving Long Island wildlife. To start us off tonight, we have Emily Hall, who will talk to us about the return of the river herring.
Great, thank you so much, Arielle. As she mentioned, my name is Emily Hall, and I'm really excited to be talking to you all tonight about the all-important river herring. So I guess we should get started, and we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so what are river herring? They are a diagamous fish, which basically just means that they live out their life between salt and freshwater and migrate between the two at different life stages. There are two different types of diagamous fish. One is anadromous, which means the fish spend most of their life at sea, but then migrate into our freshwater coastal streams to spawn. And then there's the other type that is catadromous, which means that the fish spend most of their life in freshwater and then migrate back to the ocean to spawn. River herring fall into the category of anadromous, which means that they come in the spring to spawn in our coastal streams. They're coming from the ocean. And then the other side, catadromous, is where our American eels are. So they're the ones that will migrate back to the ocean to spawn. We won't talk to them about them too much tonight in the presentation, but if anyone has questions about eels, we can definitely touch on that in the Q&A as well. All right, next slide. Thank you. So why are they so important? River herring are just essential because they basically bring ocean-derived energy into our estuaries and freshwater streams. So as they migrate between the ocean and our local streams, tons and tons of different species will eat river herring. And you know, anything out in the ocean from whales, dolphins, large sport fish, and as they're moving into the coastal section, you know, coastal birds like ospreys and otters will eat these in the estuaries and streams. So basically, they're really foundational to the functioning of a healthy ecosystem. And with the fact that so many species eat them, they're also really help support our economy as well. So things like large recreational sport fishing, whale and dolphin watching, the seafood industry is also very reliant on the river herring populations being healthy. So they're really, really important. Next slide. Okay, yeah, just press the perfect, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to show this video a little bit to give you an idea of kind of what river herring migrations look like. And I just wanted to point out too that historically river herring populations could reach into the hundreds of millions along the East Coast. Often streams basically what they would call ran silver with the amount of river herring arriving in this spring. And that's basically because river herring have a silverish color on their backs. And if you can imagine a video like this, but even more dense, of river herring swimming up into the coastal streams, that's what they would mean by ran silver. And this video is actually from the Peconic River, which is currently the largest river herring run on Long Island. Unfortunately, though, over the past 2 decades, river herring populations have decreased about 99%. So they really have dwindled over time. And move on to the next slide. Thank you. We can talk a little bit about why. So why have these populations decreased over time? There's 2 big reasons that we can go over. One is overfishing from bycatch. And bycatch is basically when commercial fishery is going out to fish for one species and then they'll accidentally catch something else. So as you can see from this photo too, it might be a little hard, the boats are a little tiny, but you can see how large that commercial fishing net is. And basically it'll just scoop up an entire river herring school of fish if it accidentally catches it when it's fishing for something else. And that can drastically reduce a population size, even within just one migratory season, if a school of river herring gets caught up in one of these gigantic nets. Another big issue has been habitat loss from stream barriers like dams or culverts. And these just make it nearly impossible for river herring to move upstream into their ideal spawning habitat. So they really want fresh water to spawn. And these dams are pretty much like the Hoover Dam to these river herring. They cannot move above them. They're pretty much stopped below the dam. And what happens is that their spawning success starts to drastically decrease over time. So they might try to spawn below the dam, but because in Long Island, like a lot of these waters below dams are actually tidal, so they have some sort of salt content in them. So the spawning success will be far reduced, and basically the populations will just keep decreasing over time because of that. Next slide. But how do we want to support the river herring populations today? What are we trying to do to bring back this super important species? So the first step is to actually monitor for river herring presence. So Seatuck and other partners across Long Island, including the Long Island Sound Study and the Peconic Estuary Partnership on the East End, we run the Long Island River Herring and Eel Survey, which operates from March 15th to May 15th. So the migratory season is kind of just wrapping up around now, where community scientists, so just anyone really, the public, anyone who's interested can go out around Long Island and help us identify what streams river herring are using and the approximate sizing of each of the river herring runs. So how many river herring are trying to make their way move upstream. This data and information is extremely helpful because it helps Seatuck and the Diogenes Fish Working Group, you can see in kind of the second image there, which is a group of environmental practitioners and partners around Long Island. And we use the information from the survey to help prioritize streams that would benefit most from stream restoration and restored connectivity. So trying to bring back that connectivity so river herring can move upstream. One of the tools we use to restore our stream connectivity is fish ladders or fish passages. So you can see in that third image there, that's a metal fish ladder. So basically these ladders can be constructed into or kind of on top of a dam, and river herring will kind of use the water to swim up and get their momentum to swim up and into the pond, and then use that pond above the dam for their spawning habitat. Fish ladders can also be nature-like. They don't necessarily have to be this metal structure, which means that they're built out of kind of rocks and concrete to more mimic a natural stream. And then river herring can also swim up into the pond that way. And in a second, I'll talk about a third restoration option as well. And then finally, on the offshore side, oh, I just want to go back for 1 second. Sorry, thank you. So then on the offshore side as well, Seatuck is also a member of the Herring Alliance, which is a group of environmental organizations and others that want to improve fishery policies to protect river herring offshore and reduce that bycatch issue. So there's been a lot of new fishery policies put in place that actually put caps on other fisheries like Atlantic herring and other items that people may be going for, so that you can't really capture that many river herring accidentally. All right, can you move on to the next one? Thank you so much. So then just lastly, I wanted to touch upon dam removal. So dam removal is another really important tool that we can use to talk about stream restoration and restoring connectivity. Many of the dams around Long Island are no longer serving their original purpose, whether it was to run a mill or create a cranberry bog or an ice pond. And a lot of times removing dams provides a far greater ecological and often economic benefit than having them there. Dam removal not only provides benefits to river herring moving upstream, but also just really connects the whole stream together, and it goes back to functioning ecologically as it was meant to in the first place. Dam removal can also provide resilience to climate change and storm surge. So one way it allows sediment to move downstream, which can usually get caught behind a dam, and this can actually feed the drowning marshes downstream, which protect us from storm surge. And then it can also act as a basin for floodwaters. So basically an area that can just absorb local floodwaters. Additionally, dams can be very expensive to maintain. So that's kind of another one of the cost factors there. And removal is often just a one-time cost. And then I just want to point out too, this is a photo of Westbrook Dam out by the Connecticut State Park. So this dam actually failed in 2019. And then since then we've seen the return of a natural stream connecting system. We've seen rare and unique plants emerging. We've seen on stormy days, it really acts as that basin I was talking about for floodwaters. So it's just a really great example of what stream restoration project can look like. All right, great. So and then I will pass it on to Mike to talk about river otters.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, Mike, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay, first slide. Ooh. Is that the first slide? All right, so on the upper left here, just a side view of the river otter. This is a semi-aquatic mammal. It's in the 3 to 4 foot range. It's in the group of mammals called mustelids, the mustelid family. So there's the weasel group, basically. And it has that long cylindrical shape, as you find with there's 3 species of weasel, and mink is another one in that category, fisher and pine marten. Very short legs. And one thing you could see in this slide nicely is that the nose, the eyes, and the ears are all in a straight line near the top of the head. So when it's swimming, it can use those 3 senses to figure out what's above the water anyway that it might be worried about without exposing a lot of the body. So when it's swimming, a lot of times you're only, and there's 3 other animals that have the same setup, the muskrat and the beaver and the mink. So it's a little tricky to tell them apart when they're in the water. Obviously, you can't mistake the river otter when it's on land for anything else. It has a very unusual tail. That's the last thing I wanted to mention about that side view. So on the upper right here, we have a gray seal, very common here in the Long Island area. You know, you get a glimpse of this popping its head up, depending on where it is. You might mistake that for an otter, but no ears, and has a different snout. Well, it's also got a huge head. Then the thing that's we would, if we do another rewilding of Long Island in another couple of years, we may be able to talk about this one in the upper right. That's the beaver. We had one beaver that had a lodge in East Hampton for 7 years, about 10 years ago, and didn't have a mate, so eventually died of old age without breeding. Very important animal in the landscape. Would be kind of tricky for it to not cause a lot of problems on Long Island, but this particular spot it picked for a dam and a lodge was perfect. It really worked out well, didn't bother anybody. And on the lower left, we have the most common semi-aquatic mammal on Long Island, which is the muskrat. More pointy snout, and if you can watch this swimming, the tail moves side to side. It's a thin, hairless tail. So the muskrat is from nose to tip of tail, that's about 2 feet. So half the size of a river otter. But it's very hard to tell that relative sizes in the water. So this lower right-hand photo is a river otter that's what we call periscoping. And if you are able to watch a mammal in the water swimming for a while, otters will do this. When they pop up from fishing, they like to take a look around and see what's around. And if they can sense you, they're kind of curious. They want to get a good look and they'll lift their whole head out of the water. The seals will do that as well, but the beaver and the muskrat won't. The other things I wanted to point out here is the nose pad and the vibrissa, the whiskers. The whiskers are very sensitive, and we think they're very important in locating fish prey at night when they're hunting at night. And also there are times of the year when they're hunting in ponds that are covered with ice, and they may have a few inches of snow on top. So it's going to be dark down there where they're fishing, and they can sense things moving around. And that's an important part of their hunting strategy. Okay, next. So we're talking about them recolonizing Long Island and what happened to them. This is on the right is their distribution in North America. About around the 1600s. So essentially, they were found in every waterway in North America. And on the left is their distribution in the 1970s. And you can see that at least in the lower 48, they were really decimated, hit pretty hard. And it's very hard to see New York State here. So 1977, the western half of New York State had no river otters. Next slide. So what happened? There were a couple things that happened. Habitat loss was one. There were no wetland protection laws, and we lost a lot of the river otter's favorite habitat, which we call riparian zones. So that's the water that they fish in. And then the adjacent area, which could be cattail marsh, today Phragmites, swamp areas. So this is where they'll rest during the day. They like to be very close to the water. In case something disturbs them, they'll jump in the water. They feel safest in the water. But the real heavy impact was the fur trade. So being semi-aquatic and having to swim fast to catch fish, unlike the muskrat and the beaver. The muskrat and the beaver can have fat, they can have longer fur to keep them insulated when they're in the water. The river otter has a little bit of a trade-off to be sleek, more like a seal. Can't have blubber like a seal though, so because it spends a lot of time on land. And they will travel several miles between watersheds to get to a different watershed. They have very large home ranges. So anyway, the river otter was the gold standard for the fur trade. It has very short but extremely dense fur. And the only mammal in North America that has denser fur than the river otter is the sea otter on the West Coast, which was also a very important and valuable pelt during the fur trade era. Okay, next slide. So in the early 1900s, there were enough conservation laws that were put into effect. Actually, New York State had a moratorium on hunting and trapping otters, and they slowly started making a comeback, and we started getting reports of sightings, reports of roadkills, even in the early 1990s. And so I wanted to, in 2008, I put together a proposal and I got funding to do a survey of Long Island to see where are they and get a sense of their distribution here. And I'm just going to go quickly over a couple of ways you can do that. You can do, for different wildlife, species, you can do sightings and map where you've seen them. That's not going to work for river otters because they're very nocturnal and they're always on the move. So it's a real chance encounter to actually see them. And they also have these large home ranges that I mentioned. So they might be in one pond for 3 days, 1 month, and not back for another 6 weeks. Tracks, we don't have a lot of snow cover here to do a track survey, but that can work in other areas. Not very useful for Long Island. We are trying to do tracking surveys in the winter here when we do get snow to pin down places where they're crossing roads and we have documented roadkills. So the most efficient way to survey for them is to look for their latrines. They're also called scent stations. And these are places where they communicate with one another. They're very, very social animals. They travel in groups. And we don't know exactly what they're communicating to one another, but they're not territorial. So they share home ranges with one another. And we think one of the things that it does is it communicates enough information so that they avoid having conflicts with one another. Okay, next slide. And it's a really efficient way to survey because if you get a report of a sighting and people said, yeah, it stuck its whole head up and I could see the neck, so couldn't be a muskrat, or in the case of a roadkill, you can look at a map and you could pick out exactly where the latrines would be. So points of land, small islands where they have to get out of the water to get around a dam, or the shortest overland route between two waterways. And this is a little pond in Southold, and it's a peninsula. This latrine area is a cutover to another pond. It's like 30 feet away across this little neck of land. And I'm paddling along looking for the latrines in late winter, and the disturbed area where they leave their scent is very obvious. No leaf litter based on their behaviors there. And it's always within about 15 feet of the edge of the water. So next slide. So it makes it pretty easy to do a survey. And this is what you're looking for. The middle slide is with that greenish mucus. That's fish scales and fish bones. That's very fresh. That's within 24 hours. And then over time, that mucus disappears and you have this kind of charcoaly gray fish scale and fish bones in a pile. And they don't biodegrade very quickly. So you could come back a month after the deposit was made and you could find the bleached bones and fish scales. So you don't have to be there right away. And we want to know whether these are resident animals as opposed to juveniles that are looking for their own home range and they're moving through an area. So you want to visit this several times and see if it's being maintained as a scent station or latrine site. And then you know you have a resident otter. Okay, next. So in 2008, I found that there was Most of the activity was centered on Oyster Bay and the Nisququag River in this area here, Western Long Island. And that really surprised me because I expected them to be out on the East End where there's more, less development and more riparian habitat. But I only found one small area that was occupied by otters, and Southold Shelter Island at a little corner of East Hampton town. And I set up cameras there in 2012 to see what was going on. It was really only, it was one otter. Its mate had been hit by a car the year before I started the study, and she had just given birth to 2 young. She had 2 fresh placental scars. So that was an unfortunate incident. So the question I had was, why wasn't I finding them more out in the East End? And what I learned from some colleagues that did radio telemetry work out in Alaska, coastal Alaska, is that although they could swim across here 21 miles in a couple hours easily, they're predisposed not to make open water crossings of more than about 4 or 5 miles. It's possible they can't detect a landmass that far away. So they really have to jump over way out here in the west end of Long Island Sound from the robust populations that we have in Connecticut. And I, in 2013, I went out to Fisher's Island to see what was going on there. Our forgotten, part of our forgotten landscape in Suffolk County in Southold Town. And in 2008, I only found 23 latrines on all of Long Island. And in 2013, I found 23 just on Fisher's Island. It's completely occupied by otters. And it's possible they could use this archipelago, the Gull Islands, Plum Island, and get to Orient, because there was a 40-mile gap between my populations in 2008. So in 2018, a decade later, I redid the survey, and I found that they were, they colonized the entire north shore of Long Island, basically from Glen Cove all the way out to Orient. And they were now in the Peconic River. And then since 2018, we have them in Connecticut State Park. We have on the Connecticut River, we have a pair in there. I don't know if it's male and female. The males travel in groups together. It could be 2 males. So we can add this on. They made the connection from a little green belt in here, from the headwaters of the Nisququag to the headwaters of the Connecticut. I also found them at this latrine on the Carmen's River. I have to verify that that's a maintained or not just a transient. And we have a pair of otters that are using Little Seatuck Creek area. And that's where we did a modification of the dam there to make a stairway recently. So they are, despite roadkills, they are doing quite well in recolonizing Long Island, and I expect them to really start moving in on the South Shore area in the coming years. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Next, we have Enrico Nordone, who will share the story of the Eastern Coyote colonization of Long Island.
Enrico, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry. Hi, folks. Nice to be with you all tonight and to join my fellow panelists. My name is Enrico Nordone. I'm the director at Seatuck. The rest of the panel have been talking about wildlife species that were either extirpated from Long Island, and with a helping hand from land and wildlife managers have been recolonizing the island, or in the case of river herring, species that have been nearly wiped out but have been hanging on and are trying to sort of restore their populations. I'm going to talk to you about a species that is not recolonizing, but is new to Long Island and expanding its range to include Long Island for the first time, the eastern coyote. Next slide, Arielle. The story of the eastern coyote starts with what we now are calling the western coyote, but we just used to just call them coyotes. Coyotes historically, based on some recent really extensive studies, were based in the West, the Great Plains, the Southwest, and throughout the Intermountain West and California. They were kept at bay from colonizing, having a range in the east. In what you can see on the map was sort of the great eastern forest by the other apex predators that were there: mountain lions, bears, and most importantly, wolves. Wolves sort of kept the coyotes in sort of more open space and marginal habitats. But beginning in colonial times, as humans mercilessly persecuted those other apex predators, coyotes found themselves with some room to roam, and roam they did. Starting about 150 years ago, started really expanding their range and taking advantage of these open niches. And they did this sort of two ways. Once moving south along the southern states, and then another population moving north up over the Great Lakes through Canada and coming down into New England. And Arielle, if you go to the next slide, you can see that reflected on this range, sort of more detailed range map. You can see the group that moved up over the Great Lakes through Canada and the group that was moving south along the southern part of the country. They then sort of worked their way north and south and sort of have merged in the mid-Atlantic states, where you see the green and blue there. Those are areas that have only been populated by coyotes over the past few decades. And if I was able to zoom in on this map, you would see on this map, which is from the study, was only 3 or 4 years old, Long Island is still gray. So they are not then at least officially considering Long Island part of coyote range. So this animal, next slide, Arielle, we are referring to the eastern coyote because the interesting thing about this coyote, the western coyotes, as they were moving north across the Great Lakes, were encountering and mixing, interbreeding with not only dogs, but remnant wolf populations that were left there. And this animal was considered a hybrid now of coyotes, dogs, and wolves, and is being considered the eastern coyote as opposed to the western coyote, which does not have the same levels of wolf DNA. There are some cases being made to consider this a separate species, but for now it is considered a subspecies of coyotes. They, just to touch on that, is that they are, they're larger than western coyotes. They're slightly more social than western coyotes, and they're holding larger ranges than western coyotes are. So this expansion, which has been happening naturally over the past century or more, has sort of culminating in their arrival on Long Island. The first sightings were in the early 2000s, but the first coyote that established a range and set up shop on Long Island was in a small woodland park north of LaGuardia Airport in 2009. There's been several sightings, or many sightings really, of sort of lone individual coyotes over the years, including one as far out as Bridgehampton. There was some in Queens and Long Island City. But most significantly, the first pair sort of showed up and established a territory on a woodland patch near LaGuardia Airport, actually right near the bridge that goes to Rikers Island. They were the first breeding pair of Long Island, of coyotes on Long Island. They had a litter in 2016 of 8 pups. Unfortunately, there was a clearing of some of the woodlands that they were in. They had to move the den. They were sort of discovered by people. These, coyote puppies are very cute, like dog puppies, and they attract lots of attention. People thought they were in trouble, and like people like to do, started feeding them. And it became a problem. The Port Authority decided that their employees were at risk, and they trapped and killed the entire lot of them and removed them. So that first breeding effort on Long Island was a failure, unfortunately. But since then, there's been repeated individuals, the young adults, as they're about a year old, dispersing from their parents and trying to find new territories. They're coming to Long Island. They're capable swimmers. It's possible they're swimming from points in Westchester and the Bronx, but more likely coming across railroad trestles and bridges at night and just sort of walking to the island. Arielle, go to the next slide. So they've continued to come. There was a coyote photographed at Robert Moses last year. Middle Island, there was a pair. But again, most significantly, last year and starting in 2019, 3 new pairs of territorial adults have set up shop in northern Nassau County. And it's significant from our perspective because they're not at the LaGuardia Airport. They're on large protected properties. They're not in danger of being bothered. The Port Authority has no jurisdiction over them. They're safe, and we expect that they will be successfully having dens this year and coming years, and that this will be sort of the launching pad for really the full colonization of Long Island by coyotes, which scientists expect will expand rapidly once they reach Suffolk County, where there's lots of open space. And over the course of the next decade, we expect them to be seen everywhere. Next slide. This is one of the northern Nassau coyotes captured on a trail cam. Beautiful animals. So what to expect from these animals? They are, scientists say, behaviorally plastic generalists, which means they eat lots of things, and they're very adaptable. They eat plants and insects, fruit. They can catch snakes and birds, but really the core of their diet are small mammals, and they're exceptionally capable hunters. And they've proven across the country as they've moved into and succeeded in suburban areas and urban areas that they continue to really rely on a wild natural diet, even in these settings. Next slide. That said, they are adaptable and they will take advantage of opportunities, and they will forage for garbage when they have a chance. And next slide. Unfortunately, they don't understand that these small mammals are our pets, so they will attempt to take dogs and cats when the opportunity presents itself. So they have proven over the years that they are capable of coexisting in suburban and urban settings, relying on a natural diet. But when we give them opportunities for conflicts like this, they will take them. Next slide. So we have been part of an effort with this coyote study group on Long Island to sort of push this idea that we know coyotes can be good neighbors, that they're going to keep to themselves. They're naturally wary of humans. They can be almost exclusively nocturnal and really exist alongside humans with us not even realizing they're there. The question is whether we can be good neighbors and whether we can do the things that will avoid conflicts. And we have created this flyer, and we're happy to make it available to everybody. But it boils down really the most important things is just not feeding them, and that includes what happened at LaGuardia, not intentionally feeding them, but more importantly, not inadvertently feeding them. And that means don't leave food outside for your pets. Don't leave your compost or your garbage accessible outside. Don't attract lots of rodents to your bird feeding stations. And if you have small dogs or cats, not letting them roam around in your backyard, especially if you have property that borders up to some natural areas. So I think and it's not our opinion, it's what the evidence has shown throughout the rest of the country. Coyotes exist in many places. Excuse me, there's 1,000 coyotes in Chicago. They're in Washington, D.C. They've proven they can be good neighbors. And if we take these simple common sense steps to avoid conflicts, we'll have successful neighbors here in Long Island. So next slide. This is what you can, in the coming years across Long Island, you can keep a lookout for these animals. And I hope your experiences are good, and we're all taking the steps to ensure that not only are coyotes good neighbors, but that we're good neighbors as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Enrico. Last but not least, to wrap up the presentations, I thought I would share with you all one of the ways Seatuck monitors this rewilding of Long Island by animals like the coyote, the river otter, river herring, and that's through our community science surveys. So for all of our priority species, Seatuck engages community science volunteers to help us monitor their populations and distribution across Long Island by filling out an online survey form. This tool is called Survey 123, and it's free and super easy to use. You can find the surveys embedded in our website. We also provide links where you can open it in any browser. And in addition, Survey 123 has a free mobile app that you can download to keep all of your community science surveys in one place. So I will just quickly take you through one of our surveys called BatMap Long Island and show you how to get there from our website. So I'm just going to switch things up here. Can you guys see the website okay? Awesome. So you just go to seatuck.org, and then what you're going to want to do is go under Get Involved, find our community science section, and go to BatMap Long Island. So now that you're on the BatMap Long Island webpage, you can just scroll through here and you'll see that that survey is embedded directly into our website. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but it asks the basic questions like name, date, the time you saw these bats being observed, the county, some behavior, and how many bats were being observed doing what behavior. And all of this information is really helpful for us, and it gives us a lot better of an understanding of what these animals are doing, where they're doing it, and how many are in these geographic areas. There's a little kind of tips and tricks for how you can access the Survey 123 mobile field app. And then we have our BatMap Long Island survey site map. So this is all the points where people are surveying for bats right now. So I know I went through that a little quick, but you can always contact us, myself specifically, if you have any questions. I'm going to provide our contact information at the end here. And that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. Like I said, I'll provide you with all of our contact information. Now we can open it up to our panel discussion. We can answer any questions that you might have. I will kind of scan through the Q&A and the chat box to see if there are any questions. But for now, I'd kind of like to kick things off with a question for Emily. We learned how dam removal can really benefit river herring so that they can access these important breeding habitats. So I was wondering, are there other species of fish that would benefit from this boundary being removed?
Arielle. That's a great question. So with dam removal, there are plenty of other species that could also benefit from this. So one of them, most importantly, is American eels. As I touched upon a little bit, and I answered a brief question in the chat. American eels, unfortunately, have also been, their populations have been drastically reduced over time due to different reasons like habitat loss and overfishing, because they are a very lucrative species to sell to other countries. American eels also have a really difficult time getting over dams. They can climb dams, but oftentimes not very successfully. And they're also super foundational to the environment. So those are one of the species that can also really benefit from dam removal. Another local fish species is brook trout that can benefit from dam removal. So this is kind of like a semi-diogenes fish. They travel between like the freshwater streams and the estuaries, and it's a really important like sport fish, and really important kind of used to be like characteristic along the East Coast and Long Island. But these have also dwindled a lot over time, and a lot for their reason, they deal a lot with water temperature, and oftentimes the dams and the ponds above them, drastically changes the temperature of the water, and they really need cool streams. So dam removal will also kind of reconnect the streams and change the water temperatures. So these are the few of the fish species, and I don't know if Mike wants to also talk a little bit about how dam removal can also be super beneficial to otters.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, well, most the otters are, you know, like I said, when they encounter a dam in their home range in a waterway, they do have to get around that. And on Long Island, quite a few of the dams, particularly on the South Shore, there's a road over the dam or very close to the dam. So I'm expecting that there's going to be more roadkills as they colonize the South Shore watersheds. And so we can, you know, hopefully we can dovetail fish passages with otter ramps, and dam removals, of course, would be terrific. Also, I'm working with the Nature Conservancy. They did a big stream crossing survey looking at the size of the culverts, the shape of the culverts, and they're really kind of doing this under the guise of sea level rise projections. And you know, are these culverts going to impede and cause flooding problems, you know, as we get sea level rise issues? So, you know, I was able to input in their database places where the culverts are not sized properly for otters to use, or if there's a dam in the way. So that's that will be helpful in the long run.
Awesome, thank you. I do have a question here. I think it's regarding coyotes. Maybe Enrico, you want to answer this one. It says, can they, I'm assuming coyotes, contract rabies as has happened to foxes?
Yeah, I saw that question. I'm not sure. Mike, do you know the answer to that question?
Yeah, I mean that we had an otter wash up on North Shore Beach, and that tested positive for rabies. So, I mean, I don't think rabies is very specific to different warm-blooded mammals. So yeah, it's possible. But I think is it rabies? I think rabies is very common in the raccoon population on Long Island.
Yeah.
And I don't ever expect the coyote population to match the raccoon population here. We have raccoons everywhere. Every single otter site, and every otter latrine is visited nightly by raccoons, and you know, maybe every 6 weeks by otters. So when I put out camera traps, I have to go through hundreds of raccoon photos before I get the otter ones. So, yeah.
I have a question about bats here. So maybe Emily, you want to take this one. What is being done to recover bats on Long Island? What can we do to help them?
Hi. So in terms of bats, there's actually a lot of unknowns about the bat population on Long Island, but some interesting kind of tidbits. One thing is there's definitely some possibly like endangered or threatened species of bats, including the northern long-eared bats, and the tricoloreds may possibly be, I think, listed soon. And the interesting thing is that the scientists think that Long Island may actually act as a refuge for bats. So unfortunately, most people are probably aware of the disease white nose, the white nose syndrome, and how it has pretty much decimated bats all over New York, all over the Northeast, and it's rapidly moving across the country, unfortunately. And we think because of Long Island's kind of coastal climate, bats are not as affected by white nose syndrome. And also since, you know, we don't have like the caves or other mines or stuff like that, where bats would usually hibernate. And the way white nose works is that once it gets into the bat system, it kind of wakes them up from hibernation, and they'll move around in the wintertime and they can't find food. And unfortunately, then they starve. So that's why with Long Island's cooler climate and the fact that there might be bugs around, if they do get white nose syndrome, they might be able to actually eat some bugs during the wintertime and actually be able to survive. So that's an interesting, really kind of little fact that Long Island may actually act as a refuge for some of these super endangered or threatened bats. One way that we can help them is that we do, as Arielle has mentioned, we have a monitoring survey for bats. So we're always constantly trying to learn where bats are on the island and learn how to better protect them. So pretty much you can use Bat Map Long Island. All you have to do is go out around dusk or dawn and look and see if you see bats. They may be coming from woodland area or kind of maybe near a pond or stream. And you can just pretty much tell us where you observe them on the island, and that's super helpful. And then in some cases, we can even come to monitor them on your property. So we have some acoustic equipment that can actually really specifically tell us what bats are on your property. So that's really helpful. And then one other thing you can do is also if you want to build a bat house. Bat houses are really great and helpful. We have some instructions and kind of helpful tips for those on our website. And if you have any other kind of bat related questions or bat house related questions, you can feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to help you with that.
Yeah, we should mention, particularly for the people on the East End, that Casey Pendergast and Sam Hoff from the New York State DEC did some terrific work out here. A lot of citizen scientists got involved with doing these surveys. But what they found was a lot of us, myself included, you know, we live in these high groundwater table areas, and we can't have a full basement. So we have a crawl space, and the crawl space mimics the requirements they have for overwintering areas. And they don't congregate in big numbers. You might have 1 or 2 bats in a single crawl space. So they're not contracting the white nose syndrome disease, the bacteria virus that is impacting them. So that was kind of a new finding. So any of you that do have these crawl spaces, we have these, as Emily was saying, we have these acoustic monitoring devices, and if you actually see them flying around early evening, and you know, we can come out and we can actually pin down what species you have with these devices.
Awesome. I have a question here. Someone's curious about if there's any research on effects of plastics in water on any of the species that we talked about today.
I'm not aware of any specific studies on these species, but I just generally, I mean, the plastic is everywhere, and there's, you know, increasing evidence that it's these, you know, these microplastics are in the body tissue of many wildlife species, and I think certainly, you know, these river herring and the river otters that are in the water. I mean, it's just I think it's just seems obvious that they're encountering it, and it's got to be having some impact. So not good.
Agreed. Mike, this might be a question for you, but someone was asking, talking about how they went to high school in the 70s in Southampton. Some of the boys in class sadly trapped and sold muskrats in the North Sea. Is this still legal?
Yeah, muskrat trapping is still allowed. The hunting and trapping regulations for the Long Island region are regulated by the New York State DEC, and it's supposed to reflect the resource. So in other words, we don't have a bobcat hunting or trapping season, but most of us, myself Tim Green from B&L and John Turner. And we had never seen a gray fox on Long Island. We thought they were extirpated. And then a roadkill showed up in the Manorville Hills area in 1995. We were a little taken aback by the fact that there is a trapping season for gray foxes. And then we looked into that a little bit more carefully, and we realized, you know, long-tailed weasel, mink, skunk, and gray fox are all allowable harvest for the Long Island region. And there's no documentation as to their distribution and abundance on Long Island. So we lobbied the state to change that, and we were unsuccessful. And out of that effort, we actually started the Long Island Natural History Conference, because we realized that, you know, to be successful, we needed to, with a lot of these campaigns, we need to rally the Long Island conservation community, you know, the who's who of wildlife research out here. And that remains the trapping situation, not muskrat are very abundant, but you know, we haven't given up on the on some of those other species that are allowed to be harvested. And Peter Scully at the time was the regional director, and he recently contacted me because he supported what we were trying to do. He's no longer with the state DEC, but he contacted me and said he has an idea about how to move that forward, that agenda. So I have to get back in touch with him.
Nice. I have a coyote question here. Enrico, if you want to take a stab at it, it says, how do you know the eastern coyotes are hybrids? Were they DNA tested? And if yes, curious who conducted the DNA testing?
Yeah, DNA testing. I'm not sure. Maybe Mike, you know who did the original testing, but there's actually a lot going on now. And in fact, our Long Island Coyote Study Group is collecting coyote scat and working with the American Museum of Natural History. They're doing the DNA testing there. And we're looking at family relationships and trying to get a sense of how sort of the coyotes that are coming to Long Island, are they direct descendants of the sort of Westchester and Bronx? And then to what extent are those relationships going to continue across the island? And but Mike, yeah, I don't know if you have a sense of how far back.
There's been a lot of work done on that recently, up and down the eastern seaboard. So it varies. What's interesting is the genetic composition of the amount of wolf and the amount of domestic dog. It varies widely from north to south. So many different. It's mostly done by universities, but there are some private labs as well. So a number of different organizations have done that work.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to think about the coyote. You know, we're talking about the coyotes coming, not coming back to Long Island, but coming for the first time. But there were wolves on Long Island. So in one sense, the extent that they are part wolf, that is a sort of a return and filling a niche that's been vacated as an apex predator. So we've been careful to say that they're not going to replace wolves, that they're not ungulate feeders, they're not generally pack hunters taking down large prey, but they are filling an empty niche on the island, at least to some extent. And we'll have, and what those impacts are going to be, we don't really know. It's one of the things we're looking at, and there's a lot of questions about how they'll impact fox and rodent populations, and a lot of questions.
I have another question about coyotes. If there are only a handful of coyote families, will there be an inbreeding problem?
Yeah. That's a good, yeah, that's another good question. They're going to expand rapidly, and there is a continuing influx of new adults moving onto the island. It just hasn't stopped, and the populations are strong in Westchester and the Bronx, and potentially coyotes coming from New Jersey as well. And so I think there's enough genetic diversity that won't be a problem. There's also a theory that coyotes are, and Mike, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but there's a pair on the North Fork. That's a long way for a dispersing adult to go from northern Queens or Westchester. So there's a theory that they're coming from that same archipelago that Mike mentioned, that the river otters might have moved across, and coyotes are, like most dogs, very capable swimmers and could be moving to the North Fork
Right.
from those islands.
Yeah, so Fisher's Island has at least one. We have a group over there collecting scat as well to get fingerprinting and get an idea of how many total number of coyotes are there. But basically 2 square miles, pretty much all the juveniles that are born over there on Fisher's Island are going to have to disperse off island. And we've had, just this year, we've had 3 reports of coyotes that have drowned and washed up on beaches on Long Island. And it's possible that they were animals that, tried to make the crossing. But in terms of the genetic diversity, you could think about, Long Island is very similar to Cape Cod in terms of the bottleneck. It's like there's one spot they can reach Cape Cod, and is really, basically, as far as we know right now, one spot that they can get over to Long Island, which is, from the Bronx, which has 5 breeding pairs, over to Queens and Brooklyn. There's no problem with the genetics or inbreeding on the Cape. So, by the way, I don't know if Enrico mentioned this, but there's a coyote that's been living in Central Park all year, and a lot of people know about it. All the birders know about it, and so far so good. He's behaving himself, and part of the reason why he's behaving himself is because the word's gotten out that, don't feed the coyote, just watch him. So we got a lot of birders turning into mammal watchers over in Central Park.
Yeah, for every, there's been some studies done for, every problem coyote that's every conflict that's been documented, almost in every case, they can trace the story back to some human behavior that's helped them acclimate to being around people. They have a natural wariness, but if they're finding food near us, they're going to be around us more often, and that's where the conflicts occur. So that that's happening in Central Park. They're not feeding this coyote. It's eating a natural diet. It's lots of people around. There's been no problems, and that's been the story really in most cases around the country. And there's been a very small number of problems. And Mike always likes to compare it to the number of dog bites and dog attacks. It's just pales in comparison. So it's something to keep in perspective. I think is important.
Very true. I have a question regarding the removal of dams. Are there any conflicts with historical groups who want to maintain the dams?
Yes.
Done. That is the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes. I'm sorry, Emily, but if you want to jump in, but yeah, no. There's been efforts to remove dams and at least broach the subject on Long Island, and there's been no dam removals here. Thousands of dams are being removed across the country. Pennsylvania and Massachusetts are taking down lots of dams. It's not happened here, and partly that's because we don't have many impoundments, the lake or pond behind the dam, and are not in remote areas in most places. They're there's houses built around them. Neighborhoods have grown up around them, and people are attached to them. And I've had several times people tell me how much they love a dam because they learned how to fish there, or their grandmother used to ice skate there. And there's a lot of these sort of stories. And I always tell people, well, for 10,000 years before your grandmother learned how to ice skate, there were fish swimming up and down a creek. But yeah, no, it's a problem. And we're careful to say that while we support dam removal and think it's needs to be an important part of river restoration on Long Island, we recognize that there are some dams that are just so ingrained in the community and such an important part of people's recreational and aesthetic uses that they're just not good candidates. But we think there are good candidate dams for removal that make economic sense and certainly ecological sense.
Yeah, there's another issue that I don't know that we touched on with the dams, and that is the water temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the huge problems with a dam is holding that shallow pond that just soaks up all that solar radiation, spring and summer, and it makes the habitat really unsuitable for some really cool species that used to be in that watershed, like brook trout.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not just the area in behind the dam that gets heated up. It's all the downstream sections of these rivers. These shallow impoundments are dumping warm water down all the time, and really just completely changing the habitat and making it unsuitable for cold water species. The other the big issue with dams is that having these ponds behind them is not, people might appreciate that and in some cases use them for fishing or swimming maybe, or just their own viewscapes, but those are, that doesn't come without a cost. And there's dams slow down water. When water slows down, it loses its carrying capacity and all the sediments settle out, and the dams get shallower and shallower. Eventually sunlight reaches the bottom and plants grow. So if you live anywhere on Long Island near a dam, that the pond behind it has some level of we call a submerged aquatic vegetation problem, and some are worse than others, where there's just no open water, so there is no swimming or boating opportunities because they're choked full of either native or invasive plants. And in some cases there's expensive efforts undertaken to remove those plants, and that's an ongoing cost to keeping the pond on top of just the cost of maintaining the dams themselves. They're, aging infrastructure. So what we're trying to make the long-term economic argument that over time, it's cheaper to get rid of the dam, restore a flowing stream, and you get ecological benefits and save money over time. Did I miss anything, Emily, or was that everything?
No, that was great. Yeah. I guess the only other thing I might add is just kind of looking at Westbrook and how it's been kind of a little bit of an example for us of what dam removal could look like, and just how ecologically valuable it's become. And we were just looking at it as a site, and even in terms of birding, the bird population that now has kind of used that space. I mean, the bird population and the diversity of birds that use that space now have almost doubled or tripled in a sense. So many different types of birds use that space. So just in terms of dam removal, just kind of emphasizing what everyone's mentioned, there's just so many benefits to, what could come of it. So I think we're just kind of trying to have that conversation with a lot of people.
That Westbrook site, that dam was built 120 years ago. The dam failed in 2019 in the spring. Within a year, the following spring, that seed bank that had been sitting dormant for 100+ years started to grow. And we were there with the New York State botanists and members of the Long Island Botanical Society for a survey. And I told people it was like being in the world's greatest candy shop with a bunch of kids, because they were just besides themselves with the plants that were growing there, and plants that they hadn't seen in many places on Long Island, and identified 6 or 8 the sort of New York State rare species, and in one case was already one of the largest populations on Long Island. So it's become, in just 2 years since that dam failed, without any intervention of any kind, there's been nothing done there, one of the richest botanical sites on Long Island. So there are gains to be made for other species, certainly.
So it looks like we have 2 questions left, and then maybe we can wrap things up in a little bit. There have been sightings of beavers on the North Fork. Is that true? Mike, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, that's true. A couple beavers made it over to, well, there's been beavers that swam over to Fisher's Island. There's no running water for them there. So these are juveniles that are dispersing from their natal home ranges, territories. And a lot of times, unlike a lot of other species, beavers spend the first year of their life with mom and dad, and the second year they help raise the next generation. So it's 2 years with mom and dad. And the thinking is because there's a lot of tricky stuff they need to learn before they head off on their own.
Engineering, Mike.
Engineering, right?
That's hard.
So when they are ready to disperse, either they're ready or mom and dad says, time to hit the road. You're out of here. A lot of times they'll find a mate to make the trip, and they travel together. Anyway, they've shown up on Plum Island, and unlike otters, it's very easy to find evidence of beavers in an area. Downed shrubs and trees that have been gnawed apart. And anyway, they showed up in Southold in Orient, and unfortunately, they got, at least one was hit and killed on the road. So yeah, they have made it over this way, but only one has survived and set up a dam and a lodge, and that one died of old age some years ago.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and then this is kind of a good question to end on. How do you educate others on the importance or gains of ridding the dams?
You want to try? You want to go first, Emily?
Sure, I'll take a little bit of it. And yeah, if you want to hop in. Well, I think just like we're doing, now, just trying to have that open conversation about, what can come of dam removal and kind of the gains that you can get from it. But also on the other note, I think when Enrico talked about ponds and how ponds are often, and the dams are often really supported around Long Island is because, they're frequently around homes, or they're frequently around well-used parks, or, trails or things like that. But I think also just kind of communicating and showing people, like, as you saw the picture at Westbrook, like free flowing streams can be just as aesthetically pleasing and even recreationally valuable as ponds. And plus they add all these other ecological benefits. They provide economic benefits of not having to maintain the dam or not having to rid the dam of invasive species or other aquatics. So I think just trying to show people the different benefits that you can get from dam removal, and that it won't come at too much of a significant cost of losing that type of pond or that type of kind of aesthetically pleasing landscape.
Yeah, one thing you might do is just point them to projects in other states, and it just doesn't take long to type in dam removal in a web search and find really just fantastic examples of successful restorations. And even people that oppose them in the beginning, some really can come around to embrace the new flowing streams and rivers and the habitat they provide. So we don't have to invent the wheel here. Whether it's been done, and we can do it here too.
It's true. I think we've gotten all the questions down. So it's about close to 7:30, so maybe to wrap it up. If you have any further questions, or if we didn't get to your question tonight, please feel free to reach out to us. I put all of our email addresses in the chat if you'd like to save them. Otherwise, on behalf of Seatuck, at least, thank you, Peconic Land Trust, for having us. And I know, Kathy, you're going to say a few words too. And thank you, Kelly, Mike, Emily, Enrico.
Yeah, I think it was a great program. Thank you all so much for making it happen. You're all doing amazing work, really important work. And, you know, the community out here, Long Island's community really has to appreciate the effort that goes into all the research and also being able to communicate the information in an interesting and informative way. So I really thank you all for being part of this program. We're happy to partner with Seatuck. So for everybody that's still on this call, we are going to be posting a recording of this presentation on our website blog. The beconiclandtrust.org has a blog in the upper right corner. So if you had to leave, or you know someone who you think would love it, please let them know to check it out. We do have a number of other programs that we've offered throughout the last, 14 or 15 months now that were all virtual, that are all living on the blog. So we encourage you to visit that. So I hope that you enjoy them. And I really want to thank everyone for being here with us tonight. And again, thank you all for being part of the panel. And
Yeah, and I want to put in a plug for Peconic Land Trust, and a lot of the participants may not be aware. I mean, it's a very well recognized and familiar name on Long Island, but the founder and still the head of Peconic Land Trust, John Halsey, he's a nationally recognized figure. If you go to any land trust meetings, symposiums, workshops, anywhere in the country, yeah, he's the man. So he's done an amazing job here on Long Island, and he's awesome. So I encourage you all to, and support the land trust in any way you can.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'll make sure that John hears about this too. He would appreciate hearing it as well. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being on the panel. And we'll say good night and look forward to seeing you again another time.
See you on the water,
Thank
Kathy.
you.
Yes,
So much.
I'll be at the beach.
Couple weeks.
So much.
So.
Take care.
All right, good night all.